So what you're saying is that in a matter of months, the Bolsheviks went from being a tiny, isolated minority with their leadership in exile to being the leadership of the Russian people. So how, having gained the ear of the people, did they go about taking power in October?
Well, basically, what happened is a Congress of Soviets was called. Soviets have been set up all over Russia, mainly in the cities, but had massive support. A Congress of Soviets was set up. Delegates were sent from each of the town Soviets to Petrograd. It was due to take place on the 25th of October. And the Bolsheviks, by the 1st of September of 1917, had gained a majority in Petrograd itself, which was the capital of Russia. And they anticipated that they would become the majority at the Congress of Soviets. And they said quite openly, and this is another question that Service brings up, and a lot of these researchers, these historians bring up, that the Bolsheviks carried out a coup. But in reality, the Bolsheviks said right from the start, we think we will be the majority. We want to create a workers' government. We want the Congress of Soviets to create a workers' government there and then, and we will do so if and when, as we think, we will have a majority. And in reality, if you look at this so-called coup, at least in Petrograd, the battleship Aurora, which was a battleship which was moored near the Winter Palace, famously fired a blank shot to signal the insurrection. And there were hardly any deaths in the takeover of Petrograd itself. And that was because of the massive support that the Bolsheviks had at the time. I mean, there wasn't a question of storming buildings, of violently having to seize various installations, various institutions and so on. It was simply a case, overwhelmingly, that in those institutions, and you do have to have, if you want to take power, workers wanted to have power, they needed to control certain things like the telephone exchange, like the barracks, like the railway stations, like the banks and so on. The truth is that in most of these institutions, the workers simply took a vote and they said, we will from now, the Congress of Soviets is meeting, we will from now on take only orders from the elected government. And therefore there was no need. Put a few guards outside these buildings and that was it. Even the famous siege of the Winter Palace, it's shown in historical terms, even in footage of film, it's shown as being stormed. But in reality, nothing of the sort happened. In reality, the government, the provisional government, which was holed up in the Winter Palace, was in effect crowded out. They went in for sheer numbers of people, went into the palace, and eventually arrested the government. So really, the revolution, which was meant to be this awful, bloodthirsty affair, was largely peaceful. There was, admittedly, a certain amount of fighting in Moscow. But, you know, if you compare that to the massive slaughter of the First World War, I mean, Russia itself, the Russians themselves had already lost, by all accounts, at least 3 million soldiers and civilians in the war. If you compare that to the Russian Revolution itself, you see just how peaceful it was, and that's another example, proof of this popularity of the Bolsheviks. A government was set up by the Congress of Soviets. The Bolsheviks did gain a majority. They set up a government which was in fact a coalition between the Bolsheviks and the left wing of the social revolutionary parties, which by then had split into a right wing and a left wing. Now, Service, in relation to the left social revolutionary party, calls them dissidents within the SR party. But in reality, in a number of cities up and down the country, the left wing of the SRs were becoming, if not as significant, then certainly in a lot of places the dominant part of that political party, and so this was reality of coalition. The Congress passed a number of laws. The first was for immediate peace. The second was a land decree saying that the land committees should be set up to immediately break up the big landowners' estates and distribute the land according to the peasantry. It passed a number of laws against discrimination, for women's rights, for the rights of the nations that made up Russia, for self-determination. If they wanted independence, they could have independence, and so on. And it gained a huge amount of support. And this was done not by the manipulation of what service implies are a few evil geniuses such as Leon Trotsky and Lenin, but it was a conscious attempt to change society carried out by millions of people. Those 250,000 members of the Bolshevik Party were having conversation with workers all the time. Little meetings, small meetings, meetings at home, meetings in the workplace. And that involved millions of people who really thought about their future, who consciously took power and attempted to create a better future.